Suspect secured!
Didn't expect to find some kid. You have your teammate to thank for this. You were sold out.
Persona 5 starts with a strong hook. This is a story about a confident, stylish master thief who, at the height of his career, is betrayed by somebody close to him. But this isn't just a story, this is a video game you play. You will be that master thief, and you will be betrayed. But by who? Could it be your best friend who loves being a thief? Or is it your little sister figure who you save from her depression? Maybe your annoying cat turns you in. Or maybe it's the enemy that constantly antagonizes you and forces his way into the group right before you're betrayed. Okay, let me back up. It's hard to get hooked in by a mystery when the answer is so obvious. There's a clear trail of red flags to follow to the correct answer. You meet a character who appears on the front of the box and hangs out on the main menu. He works on the opposite side of the law from you, but is always following you home. His Confidant rank is one of the few that is increased by plot progression, and his abilities page is strangely blank. Immediately before the mission where you know the betrayal happens, he blackmails you into letting him join the team. And then this happens. To be clear, the problem isn't that having an obvious traitor spoils a twist. I mean, when it's this obvious, I'm not even sure it's supposed to be a twist. The problem is that this sells short a really cool opportunity the game had to emotionally involve the player. By pulling its punch on this betrayal plot, Persona 5 misses a really cool opportunity to tell the story in the game. In the recent Persona games, the protagonist's strength is derived from the bonds they form with the people around them. Spending time with certain characters, called Confidants in Persona 5, grants the player advantages to help them in the game. These can be access to unique items, new combat strategies, or a number of other useful bonuses. Party members are Confidants too. In addition to their unique bonuses, all offer a set of shared combat abilities. A lot of people came into Persona 5 as veterans of Persona 3 and 4, and already know all this. When the first scene reveals that the protagonist will be sold out by a teammate, they might wonder, how would that narrative beat play into the Confidant system? After all, losing a Confidant would also mean giving up the bonuses they give you, or at least making it impossible to progress further. Not to mention you'd lose one of your party members, which might throw your combat strategy out the window. Problem is, Persona 5 goes out of its way to ensure that none of these ill effects actually happen. The traitor, Akechi, doesn't give the player any kind of useful bonus that will be missed when he's gone. He also doesn't become a playable party member until 70% of the way through the game, and you barely have enough time to work him into your game plan before he's gone again. Most egregious, though, is the way Akechi's Confidant rank is handled. Remember, Confidants increase his rank as the player spends time getting to know the character. Because in-game time is limited, choosing to spend time with a given Confidant is a decision that needs to be weighed. You might prioritize one over another because of the abilities they offer you, or just because they're a more interesting character. But this isn't how it works for Akechi. His rank, his bond with the player's character, is automatically increased at predetermined moments in the story. The game only does this for Confidants that are vital characters to the overarching plot of the game. As soon as it starts happening with Akechi, you know something is odd. Even more odd is the moments the game selects to improve your relationship. According to the game, your relationship with Akechi grows stronger even as he betrays you, kills you, fights you, and dies. What's happening is that the game wants to be absolutely sure you don't miss out on maximizing this Confidant, and is willing to manhandle the relationship between these characters to make it fit in a Confidant-sized box. By the way, one huge caveat here. I know Persona 5 Royal changes some of this, I'll circle back around to it, I promise. Okay, you get it. Persona 5 deliberately designs its betrayal plot to have minimal impact on the player mechanically. But why is that a bad thing? What would be the benefit of a game that inconveniences and frustrates the player? Well, I don't necessarily want a frustrating experience, but honestly, any kind of emotional response would be nice. Persona 5 is a long game, like triple digits of hours to beat it. That's a long time to tease this character beat with no intent of delivering a payoff. The really disappointing part is that all the tools for this plot to work are here and they deliberately designed around them. Presenting the traitor to the player using the same rules as the other party members would shrink the gap between story and game. The smaller that gap is, the more the player themselves is vulnerable to events in the story, and shared vulnerability is a powerful tool to encourage the player to really reflect on their relationships with the characters. Wouldn't it be neat if the game compelled you to really think about the different characters' worldviews, to pay attention to their different nuanced opinions on how to go around stealing hearts? Justice means something different to each of them. What? They're all the same? Did you know? Persona 5's Phantom Thieves of Hearts isn't a group of individuals. It's a hive mind controlling 8 bodies. Now I know what you're thinking. What about that time? That one where they What about when Morgana ran off? And I wasted an in-game week looking for him, and by the time I got back to the video store, my rental was late. Okay, so there's no hive mind, but characters have a habit of falling in line when they join the party. An's awakening is all about not holding back and getting vengeance for Shiho. She only lets Kamoshida live so he can confess his crimes. But after this first chapter, she never particularly pushes to punish the villains beyond the change of heart. Well, maybe she just had a vendetta against Kamoshida specifically, and now that he's gone, she's okay with going back to how she used to be.
If we ignore people who are in trouble, I'd go back to being the same as I was before.
Oh. Makoto has a similar issue. Her awakening is all about living by her own rules.
You have finally found your own justice. Please, never lose sight of it again.
Don't get all cocky just because I normally behave myself. I am done playing nice!
And here's Makoto as soon as her dungeon is over.
Study comes first, though. I won't let you off if you fail any of them. Are we clear?
The really wild example is Haru. After her very first outing with the Phantom Thieves, her father dies. But of course, she's totally fine with going back to steal more hearts.
Was that really our best piece of action?
Haru, these people are not your friends. So what's going on here? Why do so many of these characters reset their character development as soon as their introduction finishes? Would it shock you if I said it's another narrative concession to the game's mechanics?
My God.
Let's bounce back to those Confidant stories again. I already talked about how Akechi's route is predetermined, and Morgana's works the same way. For the rest of the Phantom Thieves, you meet up with the characters and spend time with them to grow closer. After a Confidant has unlocked, you can hang out with them whenever you like, as long as the character is available. Now, this is a system that works just fine for Confidant-only characters, but we have a problem when we try to slap the same system onto our party members. Do you remember Back to the Future?
Yeah, of course I do. The high school protagonist almost gets it on with his own mother and tries to get his awkward dad to marry her. That's the basic plot, right?
Right. It's one of my favorite movies. The sequels are too, actually, but they're not a perfect trilogy. See, the first film wasn't written with sequels in mind, despite what the ending might make you think. The protagonist, Marty, doesn't have any lingering character flaws going into the later films, so they have to make up a brand new one.
Nobody calls me chicken.
As a result, there's kind of two Martys.
The other me, the one that's up on stage playing Johnny B. Good.
No, not like that. There's the flat arc Marty, who's a force of change in the first movie, and the Marty who learns to overcome his insecurities in 2 and 3. The same thing happens to party members in Persona 5. Each is one character during their introductory dungeon, and a new character afterward in their Confidant scenes. This isn't always bad. Futaba, for example, undergoes a major shift in her personality as a result of her dungeon. This is followed up on in the next few days through mandatory story events, and then is followed all the way through in her Confidant route. But even when a character's dungeon arc isn't undone, we still have an issue. Remember how I said you can hang out with these characters anytime after their Confidant unlocks? That means you can be anywhere along their route from that point until the very end of the game. And during that whole time, the plot of the game is moving forward with all these characters in tow. So here's our problem. Nothing can happen over here in these scenes that would affect these characters here in the main plot, and vice versa. Which brings us back to where we started. All these characters feel the same because they can't be allowed to grow or develop. Any actual character growth might make the other version of the character stop making sense. The party members are fun to hang out with in a shallow anime kind of way, but they're not exactly interesting. Some fare better than others. Haru and Futaba both join your party late, but at least have logical Confidant story arcs that follow from the events of the story. On the other hand, they really didn't know what to do with An after the first chapter. Maybe I'm media illiterate, but I feel like I need somebody to explain why her Confidant arc is more about her modeling career than her relationship with Shiho.
In defense of An's character arc, after a few days of just going through some posts on Reddit and game FAQs, I've decided...
Now, I do want to clarify. Separating characters into 2 arcs didn't mean the characters had to be as flat and interchangeable as they are. At times like this, I think of Persona 3. You remember Persona 3, right? The characters in that changed and grew in response to the plot of the game. Characters had their own motivations for being on the team and a variety of relationships between one another. They hated each other, they resented each other, they were best friends, and one was a dog. The dog makes me happy. The trade-off was that the Confidant stories for these characters were usually only available after big character moments, like with Haru and Futaba. But this let the characters grow and explore new dynamics in the main plot. What are the character dynamics in Persona 5? Futaba annoys Yusuke. An is a sex object. There's no dog. What's frustrating is that the game has such fertile ground to set up interesting relationships. I'd have loved to see a version of this story where each of the characters had a different philosophy when it comes to the vigilante justice they're partaking in. Ryuji already comes under fire for having a pretty shallow interest in doing the right thing. It's different at least, but it's kind of the lack of a philosophy. What if An kept up this sense of vengeance longer than 10 minutes?
No one's gonna stop me now!
What if Makoto's motivation was to break the rules first, help people second?
I am done playing nice!
There's a lot swirling around here about justice, rebellion, vigilantism, the voicelessness of the oppressed, the true meaning of Space Memorial Day, but I can't be too surprised that the game fails to explore these themes through character development, because the game fails to really explore these themes, period.
I am thou. Thou art I. Thou hast acquired a new vow. It shall become the wings of rebellion that breaketh thy chains of captivity.
Wings of rebellion.
Is Persona 5 a game about rebellion and freedom? It certainly wants you to think so. There's a lot of rebellion-themed set dressing, like the whole Wings of Rebellion motif for the party's personas being based on famous outlaws, but I'm not really convinced. The game is patterned around taking down a new bad guy each chapter. In most chapters, this is an individual who is abusing power to oppress people without any. That does fit the dictionary definition of a rebellion, but something seems off. Doesn't it feel like a bunch of super-powered vigilantes would be rebelling against the systems that put these people in power in the first place? Okay, maybe they're working their way up to it. Their last target is the future Prime Minister, who could help change things on that scale. But honestly, these kids just aren't rebels. After 100+ hours of heist imagery and calling himself a phantom thief, the protagonist goes to jail for illegal entry into the Madarame residence and Okumura food, destruction of property, violation of the radio law, other infractions. Not exactly Robin Hood. The game does try to make a moral question out of the act of stealing hearts, but the entire premise of stealing hearts is that it's only possible when someone has a distorted desire. As far as we or the characters are aware, there's no way to inception somebody to give them new ideas. Okay, so they're not rebelling. I don't really know what else to say on that topic. Which is fine, because neither does Persona 5. Near the end of the game, any talk of being rebels or hating adults or whatever goes out the window, and is replaced by a more generic anime power of friendship message. Oh wait, let me finish. I know that's what the Persona games are about already. I made you sit through that explanation of the Confidant system, remember? But if the game is going to show that your bonds are your strength anyway, why not just keep doing the other idea too? Maybe because they're incompatible messages, at least the way the game presents them. The message at the end of the game is, everybody can work together to improve society, no magic powers needed. And that's fine, it's a great message, but it's also the tamest possible idea of a quote-unquote rebellion. The Phantom Thieves are reforming society by changing the hearts of one bad actor at a time, and that definitely does help people, but it's not a real solution to anything. The game knows this too. After the last bad guy's taken care of, his co-conspirators immediately make plans to continue on without him. It does set up for the finale though. These guys stand around saying, "I sure hope the people of Japan don't all hold hands and summon a giant demon together. That would really ruin our plans." But here's the problem. This change in society is treated by the game as a return to order. Again, the Phantom Thieves are only able to remove distorted desires, which returns people to a default quote-unquote good state. And fighting for a return to the status quo is not rebellion. This is not the rebel soul that resides within you. This is not finding your own justice. Calling this rebellion is like rearranging your furniture and calling it home renovation. Yeah, maybe you're better off than you were, but at some point I want to see a wall knocked down and a kitchen island installed. They don't really have a good way to swap the themes either. They just mention rebellion less toward the end of the game and bring in Akechi to introduce the idea of everybody working together. Wait, who? Oh, right, Akechi! Okay, wait, is this a clickbait video? This is clickbait, isn't it? No, not at all. In fact, just the opposite. I had to dive deeper into Persona 5 because you can't really understand the role of Akechi until you understand Persona 5's underlying issues. Maybe you're saying, Akechi's role was to be the protagonist's rival, the Zenigata to his Lupin, the Ganemo to his Lupin. Okay, you're not wrong, but Akechi isn't just a character, he's a tool. So far, I've outlined what I personally feel are some of Persona 5's shortcomings. The story hook has never paid off, the characters are largely inert, the character's rebellion is traded in for a totally different theme. The way I see it, the game gets away with having these issues, at least in part, thanks to Akechi. A plot about a traitor is hard to pull off within the confines of how the game treats party members, but having an enemy be the traitor lets you sidestep a lot of those rules. How can an enemy act be considered a betrayal? Next question. The characters aren't really changed by their journey as Phantom Thieves, but thankfully there's another take on stealing hearts in the game, and by stealing hearts I mean murdering people. It's not subtle, but it's less noticeable that the party has no real intergroup conflict when they have a common enemy to rally against. And what about the loose theme of the game? If this game was about rebellion, Akechi would have been a hard-ass Law and Order type. Shin Megami Tensei games are full of this stuff. Outside of the Persona franchise, they're all about heaven versus hell, order versus anarchy, with humanity trying to strike a balance. Instead, the cop is on your team masquerading as a biker, and Akechi is probably more chaotic and free than the Phantom Thieves. Yay, rebels. So instead of being the clash of ideologies you might expect between a protagonist and their foil, Akechi keeps interrupting the climactic fight with him to talk about how shitty it is when people work together. This fight is directly followed by what feels like an hour straight of your party members talking about how cool and great Akechi is and how they only beat him because they worked as a team.
You probably have the same talents as Joker, but because you went through life alone, the power you awakened was fueled by lies and hate.
Thank you, Futaba. I got it. In retrospect, the whole encounter is an attempt to realign where the game is headed. It doesn't even really make sense in the context of the dungeon it's in. The rest of this dungeon is about securing a place in the bad guy's inner circle. His whole deal is he wants a following so he can bring only his chosen people into his new world. It's the next dungeon that's all about the freedom of not having to make decisions, about being ordered around and not relying on a society that works together. All that being said, you might have noticed something. None of these problems are caused by Akechi, he's just involved. So why argue he's worth deleting now? Well, to be honest, I'm not. What I really want is just the opposite. You wouldn't improve Persona 5 by taking out Akechi, but an improved Persona 5 wouldn't need him in the first place. A Persona 5 with confidence in its characters would be willing to let one of them betray the player for their beliefs. A Persona 5 with fleshed out characters wouldn't need an outsider to provide a different perspective. And a Persona 5 that was willing to follow complete character arcs wouldn't need to call an audible 90% of the way through the game. We'll never get that Persona 5, but who knows? Maybe that'll be Persona 6 or 17. This script was largely written long before the English release of Persona 5 Royal, but due to a number of completely real and valid excuses, it's releasing a bit late. Persona 5 Royal, of course, is a re-release of Persona 5 with extra content packed in, along with changes to the old content. Of course, being a remake, it's not going to make the kind of sweeping changes to the narrative I've talked about here. And I won't dive into significant spoilers, but one interesting change is the addition of a real-deal manually advanced Confidant route for Akechi. I don't imagine they had the same kind of qualms about the old route that I did, but it is nice to see them attempt to pin some amount of character onto what is essentially a walking plot device. It's still the super shallow Persona 3 portable style of side story, but at least the game doesn't try to twist Akechi murdering you into somehow being a way of strengthening your bond. Anyway, thanks for watching. I wish this one had come out sooner, but it's wild times we live in right now, huh? I'm sure everybody agrees with me about everything I've said in this video, but if you have any minor issues, feel free to drop that in the comments. And be sure to subscribe so you can watch my next video, which is about how Yoshi's Island is a shallow retcon to inflate the importance of Yoshi in the Mario canon. No, that's a joke.